Welcome back. This is our second installment, second video of the Startup Law for Founders series. And we're going to take a little bit of a non-legal track for this conversation to talk about the co-founder dynamic, co-founder relationships. And to kind of jump off, Francesco, we've talked a lot about this statistic, which was mind-blowing to me at first. 2/3 of startups fail due to co-founder dynamics. In your experience, over the years representing startups, working with entrepreneurs, do you find that to be the case? Did that surprise you in your practice?
I find, I don't know about the statistics, but having read that statistic, which I think comes from Noam Wasserman and his study at Harvard Business School, I was quite astounded by it. It's a huge number, but not entirely surprised based on what I've seen in our startup practice, and also what I've seen in just the state of relationships in general. People struggle in intense, close, intimate relationships for a lot of different reasons, and the same is true in business partnerships. So it is, while it's kind of tragic, it's not particularly surprising given the, I would say, prevailing level of understanding that we have right now around relationships.
What makes it so difficult to be in a co-founder relationship as you build a company?
Well, I think building a company, of course, is its own thing, right? It's intense. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of time spent together in circumstances where people's best and worst have the opportunity to come out. I mean, it's just basically where you're in close quarters, you see you see and experience a person warts and all, and likewise, your warts are out there as well. And it's just like in the romantic context, you may have like a honeymoon period where our expectations are kind of, our minds are super clear. We're living in the moment, and whatever flaws or expectations, they're barely visible. They're not that significant. We brush them off real easily, and we're in the moment, and we're experiencing those early stages of love and being in a new relationship. And then over time, we see the warts, and our expectations kind of start to creep in. Our critical thoughts begin to creep in. We get our feelings hurt. Our egos get bruised, and there's this accumulation, and kind of like the memories kind of kick in, and unless we kind of like understand what's going on, that accumulation of baggage can become more real and solid, and kind of can cake over the essence of the relationship in a way where it feels like the relationship itself is kind of doomed and problematic, and we made the wrong choice to be together as partners, and so forth. And it's a very, very universal experience. What, of course, like it happens to all of us, and it really happens in all close relationships. And it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing because we're really up against all of our conditioning in those moments. Like, relationships have a way of really bringing us up against the most kind of intense and challenging parts of being a human being.
And in the business context, especially in a startup where there is a lot of stress or pressure to build a product, to stay on course, to hit your targets for funding, et cetera, that kind of caking over that can happen can divert your attention away from the product you're trying to build.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is really that's the biggest, and that's a significant risk, is that ultimately what what makes companies successful, what makes partnerships successful is everyone is engaged in this creative process of building a business and building a product and adapting and iterating and selling it and getting out into the world, and that takes like resilience and creativity and responsiveness and engagement, in a kind of clear-minded, full-bodied engagement in what you're doing. And when these co-founder dynamics that we just talked about start to kind of kick in, suddenly instead of the product and the company, partners are focusing on each other and on their relationship and on what their partner is or isn't doing and what they should be doing, and they're dealing with this kind of strife and turmoil, and it's a distraction. It's a distraction to the business, but it's also discouraging and exhausting, and can be really demoralizing. So so it's no wonder that a lot of founders kind of want to parachute out, because it could be a very just a very difficult situation.
Yeah, and certainly there may be some good justifications for the parachute if you decide you want to go different ways, if there's an imbalance in time or resources, or lots of different reasons. But in not all cases, which is to say, that external focus of saying, "Oh, this partnership is doomed," may not be so at all, with the right framework, the right mindset, the right understanding of your nature as a human being and your partners.
Yeah, completely. No, I think that's 100% right. That is, there are some, in the life cycle of a partnership, it might make sense to part ways, and there may be very sound reasons for that, and not every partnership, should be together, and people's lives change, their priorities change, their circumstances change, and so forth. But there is, I think, a very large percentage of these co-founder disputes that I think are preventable, and they're avoidable, if people had a better understanding or more perspective on the on what's happening and why they're having the experience that they're having.
Yeah. What is the trick to getting that perspective, to getting that understanding?
Well, I think the trick is, well, let me say what it's. I guess let me answer that by saying what it's not. Like, in other words, these are some of the directions that I looked in before to understand why I was having difficulties in partnerships, and ultimately I found them kind of unfruitful and counterproductive. So one common response to difficulty is to say, well, I just chose the wrong partner, and to basically chalk it up to these kind of immutable compatibility types of issues, right? We're just incompatible, and and that's just the bottom line. It's kind of built into the laws of nature that we shouldn't be together, and
Irreconcilable differences.
right,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. And so, kind of that's one response. It's sort of like, fixed in stone that this is just not meant to be, and and that the problem with that, and the unfortunate part of that is that it really discounts the possibility of, not the possibility, but the reality that people change. People have insights and awarenesses, and they evolve, and can see things from a different perspective, and that happens all the time. And the things that seem kind of immutable intolerable even in relationships can really become perfectly acceptable and normal and even desirable, with a change in
Mhm.
perspective and orientation. And I see that happen all the time. So that's one approach. The other one is kind of um, is to get locked really in kind of a perspective of focusing on your partner's behaviors and really um, falling into the idea, the misunderstanding that if my partner did X, Y, Z, then we wouldn't be having these issues, and that leads to a kind of stagnation, and it leads to just the status quo also being locked in place because both side both the partners are saying, no, you need to do this, and the other partner's saying, no, you need to do that, and if you did this, I would do that, and so it's just sort of like um, neither partner is really on, I would say, like a learning curve, a reflective in a reflective mode, and that dynamic tends to keep things in stuck in place where there's no forward momentum in the relationship, um, and partners can go on like that for a really long time, and I've seen that as well, um, and sometimes people just live in that state where they're just accepting a just this sort of general state of disgruntlement in their partnerships, and you can subsist like that, but there's just tremendous costs. There's a lot of wear and tear and exhaustion that comes from that way of being, and I think that there's a really big opportunity cost associated with that, because there's a lot of energy getting sucked from that dynamic, and you just think of all the things that the partners aren't bringing into their company and into their relationship because of this tug of war.
Mhm.
So that is not really a desirable or acceptable state of affairs. And then finally, when you have partners that may be interested in doing something about it, then they might get into I think a fixing it kind of mode where they're you know this is where like techniques might come in, where they think, okay, let's do let's try to manage our dynamics by putting these systems or processes in place and techniques in place, um, and and it's very much like a kind of problem solving type of mode, and that is also tends to be, I think, very unsatisfactory, because ultimately people don't want to be in those kinds of relationships where they're just kind of like trying to fix it and patch things up. I mean, really, all we want is to be ourselves. We want to be in a joyful state, in a contributory state, spontaneous, natural, authentic. We just want to be ourselves, and be natural. We don't want to be tiptoeing around our partners or tiptoeing around our own feelings and thoughts, and so it's really it can be really stultifying and kind of unnatural and ultimately unsustainable to try to take that kind of fix it approach, right? So these but on the other hand, that is really what our culture kind of offers up to us as the alternative when you're struggling in relationship, right? So I didn't again that's I think another reason why a lot of partnerships break up, because it's like, what do you do? Like, what do? You don't want to be in a coping it, fixing it kind of mode. Um, but staying is also sort of like, the status quo is also intolerable. So it's really a conundrum, and it's not just in the business context. I think we're all facing it in all of our close relationships.
What's the alternative to these three, from saying, oh, this can't be fixed, to, oh, it's just his fault or her fault, or getting in that, it can be almost an obsessive, I need to fix myself or fix this
Right.
and never getting there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there is this completely different approach to relationships and gaining understanding in our relationships, and I call it like a more like the vertical dimension, which is uh, the vertical dimension means gaining elevation and perspective and deeper understanding of what of human beings and of ourselves and of our partners and of the experience of being in relationship, um, and essentially being more reflective, getting more reflective and philosophical about what's happening in relationships through a kind of learning and reflective orientation. We gain a kind of I would say a sort of a perspective on what's happening, and that perspective, so then rather than being in the weeds of the experience, we have some elevation on it, and that elevation has a lot of benefits. It's really valuable and good for us.
Is there a moment you can look to where you've seen that play out for yourself, where you've had a moment of understanding that has helped you shift your understanding of a relationship?
Oh yeah, so so many at at so many points in time, and probably my most significant partnership is with my wife Carolyn, and uh, in the early years of our relationship, I was bringing let's say I was just bringing a whole bunch of expectations into our relationship, and the and those expectations would hit up against reality, um, or it would just kind of the expectations were in my head, and Carolyn had her own ideas about life and so forth, uh, and at first uh, I didn't I wasn't aware of that expectations um, were simply ideas that I had just made up. They were just kind of like arbitrary ideas about how another person should be acting. They seemed right. It seemed like, of course, this is the way that other people should behave. Um, it's obvious. Like that's what it looked like to me. And so it was, so no wonder that we were butting heads all the time. And I had to, uh, but then I gained understanding about the role of thought and concepts, and how concepts can come between people and break the connection between people. And I saw the nature of expectations as these kind of arbitrary figments of thought and conditioning, and I started to get skeptical of my own expectations and let them fall away. And that dramatically improved my experience of my wife, and I actually got to appreciate her for herself and not through the lens of my own ideas of her. That's like a good example of just one. That's a tiny example of how having a deeper understanding can dramatically improve uh, our experience in relationships. But I can give lots of other examples.
But that, I mean, that really hits on, kind of the setup, which is that you did not see those expectations or your conception of her as immutable. Um, you were able to move beyond saying, "Oh, you're doing this, you're doing that. I'm blaming you," and also weren't trying to fix yourself, simply getting this vertical elevation that you spoke of to say, yes, okay, I see this now. And this is going
Yeah.
to allow us to be able to connect and be creative and be ourselves.
No, exactly. It's a really good point. Like, see, once I understood the nature of expectations, I didn't have to use a technique to fight to deprogram them or change them or anything like that. That the understanding sort of normalized the experience and neutralized it really, in a very, very helpful way. I had an even more powerful experience of that recently with my daughter. I have a 3-year-old daughter, Nina. She's a toddler, and so we were in, you know, toddlers. For anybody who's raised toddlers, they have tantrums, and tantrums are just wild. The kid just flies off a handle, and you don't know what's going on and what to do, and we, in the beginning of her toddler phase, I would, take a couple of approaches because I didn't understand what was going on. And so one approach would be I would try to like comfort her and, or reason or rationalize with her, like, in other words, to explain why things were okay, and, or to bargain or compromise, though that kind of like reasoning kind of approach of comforting her through that process. And that didn't work at all. And then I would try to like um, more of a discipline type approach like that, like doing timeouts and uh, and being more stern, and that also was very ineffective. It would tend to like exacerbate, both of these approaches would tend to like prolong and exacerbate the tantrums. And Carolyn and we were at a loss, and we started just trying to understand what was going on, like why we were having this experience, why our daughter was having the experience. And what we learned was that tantrums are a they're 100% normal and natural part of how a developing child processes difficult feelings and gets themselves back into a balanced, good place, right? So it's like the self-corrective mechanism that helps children process difficult feelings and difficult experiences, and kind of clear them, and come back into a place where they're themselves. And you can see that they once they're through their tantrum, they're like, "Oh, hi, let's go have fun again." And it's like it can be very jarring, like how dramatic that shift can be. But so once I understood the beneficial role of tantrums, and that they were not just like kind of inevitable, but like this wonderful, great, uh, built-in mechanism that is kind of built into the human beings to help kids get back into balance. So I stopped fighting them. I stopped being concerned about them, because I suddenly knew, like, oh, this is just Nina getting back into balance. And I knew to just kind of be supportive of her while she was going through that process. So it just ended. I also knew not to try to rationalize with her at that time, because, when a kid is in a tantrum, they can't think clearly. So all of it just made, being able to, like, understanding what was happening with her helped me to be there for her. It helped my experience as a dad so much. And it's just really, it made a huge, huge difference in the experience of raising her as a toddler. And it was nothing needed to be fixed. Nothing needed to be fixed. It just understanding is what was missing at the beginning, and what I gained later on. And through understanding, my experience and natural responses in the relationship with my daughter just changed. The way I was before no longer made any sense, didn't make any sense to act, to rationalize or discipline, given my new understanding. So I love that experience because I feel that it's actually a perfect sort of, it's this metaphor like this. It encapsulates so much of what I think we experience as grown-ups as well in our relationship.
Totally.
You know, like, yeah, my daughter's a toddler, but look, I mean, in a way, like we're all up against the same things. We have our fits. We get into like these reactive states. We get triggered. Our egos get bruised. You know, we're back on our heels. We get defensive, and you know, we're not thinking clearly. We're thrown off balance. You know, we're in our own adult versions of tantrums, and sometimes they really resemble toddler tantrums.
Yeah.
And you know, and kind of understanding what's happening, and in the context of the human experience as a whole, is just so helpful, not only when we're going through it, but also when our partners are going through it. You know, and you know, just so many struggles and difficulties that I see in businesses, and I mean, I'm not just talking about small businesses and, you know, young founders. We're talking about, you know, all across the spectrum at all levels of business, is, you know, this exact kind of dynamic playing itself out.
Yeah. And I guess two points on that. One is that the self-corrective nature of it is present for the toddlers, but for the adults as well. And that if we can keep that in mind and have that understanding, it's going to really impact the way that we can, you know, if our co-founders going through one of those ebbs and flows, we're able to be with them and know that it's temporary, that it's going to self-correct, that we can come back to a place of rapport.
Totally, yeah, yeah. That is a major shift that can occur, you know, when we have like an understanding of when someone's in a reactive or difficult place. You know, the tendency is to take it really personally, or to think that it's like it's an indicator of of things going wrong, like the way I thought my child's tantrums were a thing going wrong, when really it's kind of a part of a natural system that's in place. So our intense and strong feelings are, that kind of can come up, are a an indicator that we're processing something, right? An indicator that we're off balance and our system is at work trying to process it and getting us back into a good place. Um, and so this is the problem with having a fixing it mentality or fixing it orientation without with inadequate understanding, because it's like we're trying to fix our basic human nature, but you can't fix nature. Like nature is designed, it's designed well. It's the human system is designed, to bring us back into balance, and it's designed for us to thrive. So fighting a part of it is kind of like, it's like fighting the immune system.
Yeah.
The immune system, like, it's like fighting a fever. Well, a fever is there. It's merely an indicator that our body's working the way it should.
Yeah. With all of this is all kind of you know, a scratch on the surface, so to say, of Cofounder Dynamics, which is, you know, our program to help co-founders gain this perspective and understanding. Links to that are provided in the email and on YouTube. And I think this is a good foundation for the next video in the series as well, which is really about bringing more people into the team, hiring your relationships with service providers, and some of the more legal aspects of what those relationships entail.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, co-founder dynamics is like, you know, it is just our contribution to helping founders with these human aspects of their partnership, and giving them some, kind of a basic perspective and a learning orientation to their partnerships that, based on, from my own experience and my own training, is tremendously helpful. And that, what's so powerful about this is that it obviously doesn't only apply to co-founder relationships. It really is, it's a universal, it applies universally really to all relationships. And that's why it's such a, we cover this early in this program, because it's, these kinds of, these strong relationships, not legal relationships, but human relationships, are the foundation of successful companies. So, from that foundation, in this next lesson, then we talk about, the onboarding teams and scaling up. But it's really nice to be able to bring, this other kind of human and holistic perspective on business building.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Cool.
Chris.
Thank you. And with that, folks at home, we'll see you in the next video.